Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
Welcome to 10 for 10 for the week ending August 17, 2024. We were off last week for travel, but we're back. Our first story this week comes to us from Law 360, which reports that the Department of Justice has defended its Boeing plea deal over the family's objections. The DOJ says it cannot get a criminal conviction, and so Boeing pleading guilty is the best thing. They really gloss over the problems I see with the monitorship, and the family obviously thinks there needs to be more robust oversight over Boeing, and I certainly agree, as the next story will tell us. Our next story comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, and it is about the new CEO of Boeing, Kelly Ortberg, and the just horrible culture that he has inherited in his new role as the CEO of Boeing. So the culture problems are well reported, but the toxicity that exists now is really something that is beyond the pale. And I think this is where my omnibus monitor approach would be most helpful for Boeing and give comfort to the victims' families. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, David Smagala reporting that Chief Compliance Officer pay has risen, but at a slower pace. The median salary is up to $419,000 in 2024, up to $250,000 at nonprofits. Interestingly, if you are a JD, i.e. a lawyer, you tend to get an increased amount of pay as opposed to a non-JD CCO. So good news on the continued rise in CCO pay, although it's slowed down a bit. We hope that the CCO role will continue to be compensated at an appropriate level. Next up, the SEC has tagged Truist, TD Bank America, and a host of other financial firms of over $475 million in the latest in a multi-year sweep focusing on traders' use of off-channel communication platforms such as WhatsApp and iMessage. This was announced this past week, and the SEC actually said it was charging 26 firms for failing to monitor and preserve certain electronic communications. The CFTC also imposed additional penalties on 3 of the firms the SEC had fined over similar violations. Companies continue to fail to monitor text apps, and this violates the firm's record-keeping obligations. Next up, from the New York Times, Smartmatic officials are charged with bribery of a Philippine government official. Actually, 3 current and 1 former execs were charged in a bribery scheme in the Philippines. The indictment said from 2015 to 2018, Smartmatic's president and co-founder and other executives funneled at least $1 million in bribes to the former chairman of the Philippine Elections Commission so that the company could obtain and keep a contract providing voting machines and election services in the Philippines. Obviously, this is a direct violation of the FCPA, and this is something that it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out in court. Our next story comes to us from the Financial Times, and it reports that the United Kingdom Serious Fraud Office has charged 2 more persons in the Glencore corruption case. This probe earlier, Glencore's ex-head of trading, Alex Beard, and 4 were charged with corruption. Well, the SFO announced it was going to charge 2 more individuals. Interestingly, these individuals are outside the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom and can't be extradited, so the UK has invited them to come to answer these charges. Well, good luck with that. Next up, a continuing troubled story from Reuters about corruption in Ukraine. Ukraine detained one of its 4 deputy energy ministers and 3 other suspects who were caught red-handed receiving a $500,000 bribe, state prosecutors said. Ukraine has stepped up a wartime campaign against corruption to help prove the country's credentials for joining the EU, and it has made fighting graft a priority. In the energy sector, it's a vital cog in the national war effort against Russia. So, Prosecutor General said the suspects had demanded a $500,000 bribe for facilitating the removal of state-owned mining equipment from war-torn areas. Next up, from The Conversation, a story about anti-corruption, anti-bribery in Paris. Obviously, the Paris Olympics was extraordinarily successful, perhaps the most successful Olympics since 1984, when Los Angeles hosted them. And interestingly, in 2028, LA will host them again. But I think it all started with the Olympic Committee, the Paris Olympic Committee's work around anti-bribery, anti-corruption. Professor Andy Spalding at Richmond University led an effort which put anti-corruption and anti-bribery language into the master agreement that the Paris Olympic Committee signed with every vendor and contractor who did work for that group. And I think that expression of tone about this Olympics really led to one of the most successful Olympics ever. Obviously, the situation in France has changed dramatically with the French passing Sapon-Deux, but there was also the creation of the AFA, or AFA, which is the body that regulates compliance programs around anti-corruption. They actively assisted many companies in this. If you contrast that with the Department of Justice, or SEC, who view themselves as regulators, and although they give us a lot of great information, they're really not there to help companies put compliance programs together in such a manner. So great work by the French government and the Paris Olympic Committee. And then South Africa is continuing its effort to get off of the FATF gray list for its failures around money laundering. South Africa claims it has improved its program against money laundering for banks and other financial institutions in the country, and they really want to get off this list so that they can join the world economy in a more robust and fulsome way going forward. 10 for 10 is a production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. Check out the website and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you will check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency. 10 for 10 is a production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. Check out the website and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you will check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.